Good morning everyone. Could I ask you all to stand as the Subiaco water polo team form a guard of honour and we welcome Matthew into our presence. Thank you and please be seated. Could you now please check your electronic devices and make sure they are turned off or on silent mode so that you can focus on the ceremony today. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for your attendance as we honour the life of Matthew Price. My name is Helen, and as the celebrant, in combination with the team at Subiaco Funerals, I'll steer you through the ceremony today. At the conclusion of the ceremony, Matthew's family would prefer if you save your hugs and condolences to later in the day. They're going to gather as a family in private in our reflection garden. And they welcome your presence with them at 4 o'clock at the Last Drop Tavern in Wembley for a few drinks and time to share your thoughts. Matthew told his family and friends when he was 16 that he preferred to be called Matt. He thought Matthew sounded far too biblical for his principles. And when he was born on the 4th of July 1995 to his parents Denise and Don, he was named Matthew James Price. This was a traditional name that incorporated into most of the boys' names in Denise's side of the family. And as you know, he grew up not too tall, so Denise agreed to call him Little Matt, and did so for the rest of his life, much to his annoyance. He was a baby brother to Ben, who was then 5, and Beck, who was just 15 months old. He remained close to Beck, and they told each other many private things. Matt always wanted to be a doctor. He wanted to be there to help patients who could not help themselves. According to his brother Ben and his teachers, he was always the first to run to the first aid kit and never minded the sight of blood. As a teenager, he joined St John Ambulance Volunteer Brigade and loved going to large events where he could be the first to respond to any first aid situations. Matt never made it into medical school, but instead he threw himself into his studies as a registered nurse. Beck tells me that he would have been an awesome nurse. She thought he was in a good place both mentally and emotionally to become the best nurse that he could be. Regrettably, Matt never made it to the end of his studies. In our grief and distress, we must acknowledge that to take one's own life is unexplainable. To choose death over life goes against the tide of life that flows from the heart. We don't know what caused Matt to take his own life. It could be the burdens about which we had no knowledge, or overwhelming tension, anxiety, failures, unresolved guilt, loneliness, or the relentless attack of his own dark thoughts. We are all so much more fragile than we know. Even if you do find explanations, you may not be completely satisfied. You may still ask why. Often, there is no answer. You can only hope to maintain the wonderful memories that you have of Matt and know that he is at peace. Beck is now going to come forward and read Matt's eulogy to the family, and they've all helped put it together. My brother Matt was the most amazingly vibrant, feeling, loving, creative force that you could imagine. Matt was full of life. My earliest memories of him are at my 6th birthday party. He ran off with the present that Aunt Maggie gave me. It was a pair of dress-up shoes and a handbag. This was my first glimpse into his fashion sense. After Dad made him give them back to me, he sulked, and when it was time for me to blow out the candles, he jumped up and blew them out before I could. Over the years, he would become my fashion guru, telling me what went with what and how to accessorize. I'm wearing this outfit today to honour his flair for my fashion, as he actually chose this outfit for me to wear to his graduation. As we walked to primary school in the early years, Mum would always stand at the door and wave, making sure I was holding my little brother's hand for safety. As soon as she closed the door, he'd pull his hand away because apparently girls are yucky. During high school, we stayed closer than usual for a brother and sister, and we found that we were able to tell each other things and that loyalty and confidentiality were both what we found crucial. So when he was in year 11 and he declared himself to me that he was gay, he knew that I would keep it to myself. We talked for months about it and he became more confident in himself, but really stressed about telling Mum and Dad. Well, the day after graduation, in year 12, he told Mum. She hugged him and asked if he was okay, and then asked if it was okay for her to tell Dad. Dad was some more traditional in his thinking. When Dad found out, he did struggle with the concept and found it quite difficult to process. But despite that, he never stopped loving Matt. Communication was always laboured, but they often would agree to disagree, just for the sake of peace. Not long after that, Mum and Dad went their separate ways, and Matt often blamed himself. We tried to tell him that that wasn't the case, but he was a worrywart and he took things so personally. Ben, myself and Matt spent many Sundays out on the Ben's little tinny, not fishing, just yakking and discussing our latest love interests and all of our fantasies. Then one Sunday, Matt told us that he'd been chatting online to the person he thought was going to be his future husband. They were chatting for weeks about where to meet, and in a few days it was all going to happen. He was a bundle of nerves and drove us crazy with all the what-ifs. But immediately the date ended, he came home full of hope and elation. The relationship had progressed, and Ben and I often found ourselves squished up in that little boat with the new boyfriend Ryan. We all loved him, and when they later became engaged, we were so happy. When Matt got into nursing at uni, we were all so glad for him. He was about to do something that had been close to his heart for years. He had found the practical units were absurdly easy, but the classroom study and subsequent assignments were tough. He only just passed them. He would study hard, but his stress levels let his memory down often. In his third year at uni, Ryan and he decided that they would make a home in Tasmania. So Ryan went over and found a lovely property, and they began making plans for a wedding after the graduation and a big move. I know that Matt was stressed about the big move, but I assured him it would all work out, and of course, if it didn't, I was here for him. Ryan bought a couple of horses and they planned to ride together as much as possible. It meant though that Ryan had to stay in Tasmania for now. So Matt stayed in their apartment here and continued to study. I could see the weight of everything had begun to change Matt's behaviour. He seemed very unpredictable, and despite my offers of help, he retreated and kept saying he needed to study. On February 4th, the night that we lost him, I visited in the morning. I brought his favourite protein balls to snack on while he was studying. I gave him a hug at 3 p.m. and went home. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, and although we are still trying to put the puzzle pieces together, I know we will never have an answer. So instead we are crying out with pride to drown out the idea that mental illness carries shame. If you or anyone you know appears depressed, please encourage them to get help. Matthew was a good person, someone who somehow lost a zest for life. We will miss him tremendously. We know he is now free. Rest in peace, little brother. Thank you, Beck, for sharing those intimate thoughts with us all. We'll now take a few minutes while we turn our attention up to the screen, and we'll see many of the happy snaps collected by friends and family during Matt's life. Before we commit Matt's earthly body, I have been asked by his father Don to read some words to you from a song called The Joy of Living by Ewan McCall. Each of you bears inside you the gift of love. May it bring you light and warmth and the pleasure of giving. Eagerly savour each new day and the taste of its mouth. Never lose sight of the thrill of the joy of living. Could I ask you all now to stand as we farewell Matt for the last time? Matt, it is with such sadness we say goodbye to you. We celebrate you, we honour you, but most of all, we pay tribute to that consistent love and sense of fun that you always shared so willingly with your family and friends. We thank you so much for every little gift that you've contributed to this life, and thank you for your care and dedication to humanity and the lives of others. The end came at the time of your choosing, in your home that was your sanctuary. The peace that had so long eluded you is now destined to be yours.